Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for being here on day 3 of our orientation jumpstart. Really excited that you are here today for our final two presentations and the first of our final two presentations on knowing your limit, finding balance in everyday life. One of the issues, one of the things that we hear new students talk about is how am I going to balance all of this? How am I going to get into grad school and balance all of the other hats that I wear? It's something that every grad student has to struggle with sometime in their experience, whether it's before they begin, when they're in the middle of it. It happens, you will feel it, and that's okay. It is definitely okay. It's good to validate it and good to understand some things that you can do to be able to mitigate that along the way. And so today I'm really excited to be able to have Reilly Chabie with us today. And Reilly works within our CAPS Center. You learned about CAPS the other day if you were here, but we'll learn a little bit more about it today as well. I'll have Reilly introduce herself today too, to allow for you to get better know what she does in the center, and then we'll talk about their topic. We'll have some time at the end for you to ask questions as well. So, thank you again for being here, Reilly. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lewis. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your day to be here. As introduced, my name is Reilly Chabie, and I am one of the counselors at Counseling and Psychological Services. I'll talk a little bit more about what we do at the end of our conversation today, but I'd just like to share that I'm here to support you in your time here at UM-Flint. So feel free, even after this presentation, to contact me at any time if you have any questions or concerns. But going ahead and jumping into our conversation today, the topic that we're going to be focusing on is a little bit different than the title of my slide here. We're going to be focusing on the concept of finding support and setting boundaries, which I think are two crucial components to this overarching theme of balance, which is kind of where I'm going to be gearing the conversation. So I think something that's often missed in trying to set boundaries or in developing support is being able to figure out when you actually need to do those things. And a great way to understand that is by understanding balance and how we maintain that, which in graduate school is going to be a big necessity. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So first and foremost, just a brief table of contents here, I guess. First and foremost, we're going to talk about the 8 dimensions of wellness. What are they? Why are they important? And understanding the dimensions themselves. We're going to then take those dimensions and kind of relate them to what balance is, determining what unbalanced experiences look like, as well as finding tips and tricks to maintain and create that balance that we're looking for. We're going to talk specifically about setting boundaries as a component of the conversation. And then we'll end off with some general summaries and resources on campus that I always like to let students know about. All right, so here is a wonderful depiction of the 8 dimensions of wellness, which U of M specifically focuses on these areas in all of the programming and things that you experience at your time here at U of M Flint. In fact, if you've attended any of our other orientations or had conversations with some of the other teams within the Division of Student Affairs, a lot of them are operating under this umbrella concept. And as you can see, it kind of creates a pie or a pizza, however you want to see it. And it represents the kind of 8 dimensions that create a whole person, for lack of a better term. So each of these dimensions are what helps us be our own individual selves and kind of helps us achieve our full potential in a variety of ways. And we can think of these as systems that we try to maintain focus on by doing things to support each area. So for example, for the social part of our wellness, we're going to be spending time with friends, family, those types of things. Or for spiritual, we may be focusing on our connection to nature or religions or other kind of forms of spirituality, right? So we do focus a lot of our time and energy in that process of connecting to each of these dimensions. Now, when we're spending a lot of time in one area of our wheel, if you want to call it that as well, sometimes that means other areas might falter or be maybe a little less balanced than what we would prefer them to look like. So the hope is that through the process of understanding this wheel and looking at all of the dimensions of wellness, we can not only determine when our wheel or our whole person is functioning well, when we're giving equal time or the appropriate prioritized time to these individual areas, or when maybe one of these dimensions is not getting as much attention as it needs, and we're starting to feel maybe a little out of sorts. Or a little unbalanced in some way. So we can look at how we're actually spending our energy and time in these dimensions by reflecting on our own values, the actions that we take in order to support these areas, and whether or not there are any gaps in that process. So absolutely, this is a great way to kind of look at balance if we're kind of looking at a tangible or a visual representation of that. So dimensions of wellness, kind of keep that in the back of your head as we continue in the conversation today. So speaking of balance, right? So we're taking all of those dimensions, right? The 8 dimensions of wellness, and we're trying to maintain some sort of balance within all of those areas. And I think a good way to determine how we're balancing those areas is by looking at what we can kind of consider our roles in our day-to-day life. And all of us serve a variety of roles and responsibilities every single day. So as a student, you're going to be serving a role as a student, a graduate student in your program. You may serve roles as friends or a partner or a boss or an employee or a variety of other different roles that you're constantly engaged in, uncle, aunt, etc. And with each of these roles comes a level of responsibility. And we'll focus a little more on the concept of being a student and the things that come up in that role. But we want to make sure that we're providing as much balance as we can to all of those roles, depending on how we're doing in those dimensions of wellness. That once again, if we're struggling socially, our role as a friend may not be as balanced as we want it to, right? Or if we are concerned about our academics, right? Maybe our occupational or other areas of our education are not being focused on as much as we want them to be, right? So we're looking at those roles and responsibilities as a place to start in terms of creating that balance. So as we're trying to balance all of these roles and navigate the world as a graduate student, it's important to know what are kind of the signs or the ways in which we know we might be struggling with balancing those things. And obviously this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some kind of core components we'll notice in what it feels like to be unbalanced or disconnected from that balance. So a couple of things we might want to pay attention to include when we're serving in these roles, are there too many demands within that role, right? So if I'm serving as a student, a friend, a sibling, and a partner, are we experiencing a really high demand in any one of those areas that is keeping me from being able to manage the rest? And sometimes that does happen in graduate school. Sometimes it happens in our relationships, where there's a lot being added to our plate that we're just not navigating as much as we'd like to or as best as we can. So we might start to notice some balance issues in that area. If we're constantly struggling to engage in kind of managing expectations, we might notice we're striving too much toward perfection, right? Which perfect doesn't exist. It's kind of a difficult space to be in. Of course, we want to do well and we have standards and expectations. But at the same time, if we're constantly pushing toward, I gotta be perfect at these things, and we fall short of what that perfect looks like, we're building this sense of disappointment and kind of disengagement and sometimes resentment towards the process altogether. So it can be really challenging to navigate that. Once again, if we're setting unrealistic expectations for ourselves to try to manage all things all the time, then we're also going to notice some struggle with balance. So once again, the goal here is to not necessarily be perfect and maintain 100% effort in all of these dimensions of wellness and all of the roles that we're in, but more so, how do we create a balanced system that allows us to feel each and every day like we are able to manage whatever roles we need to that day. And that might mean one area requires more effort in a particular day or time than another one, right? That if my friend is struggling with something, maybe I'm going to focus more on supporting my friend than perhaps going on a bike ride in that moment or whatever it might be. And that's okay. That's how we kind of balance, if we're thinking of the scale, right? That's how we kind of balance it. That it's never going to be fully perfectly aligned, but we're going to kind of keep it close to that middle range by adding and subtracting that energy in these areas to the best of our ability. So good things to kind of think about. And I see a lot of you are here. I don't necessarily know if the chat function is available, but if you have any thoughts or experiences about what you find to be difficult about maintaining balance, I'd love to see some of those things. And maybe if you have questions about balance, you can add those in the chat for me to be able to answer those later. But there's lots of different ways that we might notice a difficulty with balance, and these just are a few ways to kind of look into that. So let's say we're starting to experience that difficulty with balance. We're struggling to maintain those roles, those responsibilities. We're seeing how trying to navigate all of those roles are kind of impacting our day-to-day functioning. Something that very frequently pops up as another kind of sign of imbalance is burnout. And I know that's kind of a buzzword, right? Most of us know what burnout is. Most of us have experienced it in some way. I definitely know that I have in a variety of contexts. And it's helpful to know that burnout does happen when that difficulty with balance is getting really chronic, right? Where we haven't adjusted those scales frequently enough or as well, and we're really kind of sitting in those extreme areas of the scale of our level of balance. And I find it helpful to talk a little bit about some of the signs of burnout, just to kind of keep those things rolling in your mind to be aware of. And once again, like, we're not looking at exhaustive lists here because everybody's experience is going to be different per their own moment. But some things to kind of keep an eye out for when we notice that that difficulty with balance is getting chronic or more intense than what we can manage. We might notice things like higher blood pressure, headaches, sleeping concerns, stomach aches, a lot of physical symptoms. We might also notice maybe some of those more difficult things like mental and emotional signs, for example. So we might notice it's difficult to concentrate. We might have lower mood, so feeling more down than usual. We might notice some loss of interest in fun activities or things that you enjoy. Maybe you feel like you're falling behind in schoolwork or other responsibilities at your job or wherever you're at any given point. And a really common one, and I know I've felt this when I've been burnt out, is feeling stuck, right? That maybe we've been doing something or we're trying to do homework or we're looking at a project or something and we just feel stuck in that space. We can't seem to think our way out of it. And a lot of these things kind of connect, and it becomes more and more of a problem the more and more we see all of these signs and symptoms kind of popping up. So keeping those things in mind, this is when we notice our balance being really impacted by our difficulties of those areas of wellness. So I think it's helpful to look at burnout. Obviously, everybody deals with this differently, looks at it differently, but it's helpful to know some signs and symptoms to kind of keep yourself aware of the process. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time kind of becoming aware of balance, how it might falter at times due to our priorities and just how we're managing things, some of the signs and symptoms of limited balance or disrupted balance. And of course, knowing that balance plays into these concepts of finding your support and setting boundaries and kind of creating a dynamic where balance can be had, it's helpful to consider maybe some overarching goals that we kind of want to incorporate in our day-to-day in order to get to that level of balance that we're talking about. So first and foremost, balance is kind of a continuum, right? It's not balanced and then unbalanced or imbalanced, right? It's kind of think of it on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being I'm feeling like my life is a disaster, I can't balance anything, to 10 being perfectly balanced, as in we're feeling relatively content, things are kind of managed the way that we wanted them to be, and we're doing well, right? So we can fall anywhere in that spectrum at any given point. There's no rhyme or reason to it necessarily as to when that's going to look different. It all depends on how much we're managing those roles and responsibilities and keeping an eye out for our dimensions of wellness and whether or not there needs to be support in one area. So in order to achieve that balance, we're looking at incremental steps, right? We're looking at what can I do in this area to help me feel a little more balanced? Or am I doing too much in this area that's not allowing me to feel balanced? We're taking those small steps in multiple places in order to create that overall balance. And once again, balance is going to look completely different for you as it would for me, as it would for your friends, your family, etc. So you are the only person that's going to be able to determine what that dimension of wellness and all of those different areas are going to look like per your own values, your interests, the things you're trying to accomplish. So if you value your social life a lot more than you value perhaps financial aspects of your wellness, okay, you might be spending more time socially than you are, balancing a checkbook. And that's fine. It just depends on where you're at in your life and what you need in order to support that overarching balance. It's also important to know, oh, okay, I do have a question. Let's see if I can see it.
Yeah, Grace just raised her hand. I didn't know if you wanted to
Oh,
take
sure.
questions as we
Oh,
went
sure, yeah.
along or
No,
yes?
feel free.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead, Grace. Grace, you should be able to unmute if you have a question.
And also, if you're not feeling comfortable with saying it out loud, I think you can enter it in the Q&A or the chat.
Yeah. Well, why don't you keep going for now and we'll let Grace
Okay.
ask her question later.
Yeah, no worries. I appreciate that. But yeah, so another thing to kind of think about here is why balance is even important in the first place, right? So balance, once we've kind of developed that core idea of what our own balance is going to look like, we're going to see a better increased mood, right? We're going to notice our relationships are feeling a lot more balanced and we're feeling connected to the people that we want to be connected to. And honestly, you're just generally going to have a greater enjoyment of life, right? Because you're not feeling like you constantly have to devote energy to one area as opposed to another, right? And this is all in the context of the fact that you're going to graduate school, right? And I know that that's a priority for many of you to be able to focus on that and learn and grow as the person that you want to be. And a lot of that ability to focus and maintain that connection and value to your education comes from being able to balance these other areas as well, which hopefully through this presentation, we kind of get a hint as to how we can do that. All right, So let's take a second here to kind of talk a little bit about ways to build balance. We have that foundational understanding of what balance is, how we can find it, how we can find the missing links in some of these areas. The best way to kind of adjust to that action or that tangible approach is by looking at actual skills to increase in your day-to-day life that can kind of help manage some of these areas of wellness, as well as just be able to maintain that mindset of, okay, I'm looking for balance here, whatever that balance continuum looks like for you. So we'll start with a really big part of this, and I'll talk about this a couple of times in our presentation today, but we really want to focus on practicing the concept of self-compassion and acceptance, right? So Kristen Neff is an amazing woman who kind of created this really awesome educational material around the concept of self-compassion. And she describes self-compassion as, and I'm going to quote this for you, the practice of being kind and understanding towards oneself when experiencing failure, inadequacy, or suffering. And arguably that's kind of intense, right? To feel these moments of inadequacy, suffering, failure, those are heavy words to think about. And truthfully, all humans in some capacity have been through experiences that can be labeled with some of these adjectives, right? So when we're thinking about this, we really want to add in a little bit of grace toward ourselves. We want to accept the fact that we're human and that these things are difficult, and we deserve to learn and build the balance in the best way that we can, while recognizing and accepting that there isn't going to be a perfect version of this. There are still going to be moments where you struggle, and that's okay. And that's kind of where the balance of self-compassion and acceptance come into play. And that's going to make your process of doing these incremental steps a lot easier, is by saying, okay, I'm not going to be perfect at this. This is a practice. This is a process. I got to take it one day at a time, recognize that it's okay if I, make a mess up here or do something differently here. I learn from that and move forward. It's also helpful to kind of think about how your emotions are going to play a role in this. And truthfully, being able to build balance is just as much as important as focusing on like those positive moments, the peace, the contentness, all of those good things about being able to have balance. But it's also about being able to feel and acknowledge when we're not feeling so great, when we're feeling uncomfortable, when we have some of those more negative emotions, anger, sadness, sometimes even deeper, right? Despair, frustration, whatever it might be, that in order to appreciate that space of positivity or growth or some of those more peaceful experiences, it's just as important to be able to acknowledge, like, wow, whatever's going on in my life, these gaps in my dimensions of wellness, if we want to put it that way, I need to acknowledge that that's there and maybe feel that and experience that. And that's going to help kind of be a motivating drive to be able to engage in some of these tips, actions, things that we can process together to get back to that level of balance. And this one's a really hard one to do, right? This is not just going to be a simple process to be like, yep, all right, I'm giving myself the permission to feel. You can utilize CAP services to help with this too, but at the same time, this is a process. It's going to take time to be able to build up that momentum. Another cool way that we can kind of find balance or build up that process of balance is by using skills that we label as distress tolerance skills. So distress tolerance, very similarly to the idea of self-compassion, is to be able to manage our distress, right, in the face of any obstacle, right? That we want to be able to say, yep, these things are really hard for me right now, but I can manage my distress by doing some of these skills, enduring and accepting the discomfort that I'm feeling, and then being able to kind of build some resilience through that process. So a couple of ways that we can do that is through a concept called radical acceptance. So I'm going a little out of order here because radical acceptance is an interesting concept. It comes from a therapeutic intervention called dialectical behavior therapy. And radical acceptance involves fully acknowledging and embracing your present moment. And that means, very much like what we've talked about with balance, all of the difficulties, all of the discomforts, all of these things that maybe are outside of our control, we're accepting these and embracing them without trying to change them. Because unfortunately, something that everybody kind of falls into the trap to is we always feel like we can change the thing, right? Or fix the problem. And sometimes that is the case. Don't get me wrong, that absolutely is truthful in a lot of ways. There are also so many things outside of your control that if we focus so much of our energy and effort into trying to change those things that are outside of our control, especially the ones that we don't feel comfortable with, that's a lot of energy that could be spent in some of those areas of wellness or in the roles that we have, such as student, partner, friend, right? And those are things that we always have control over. So radical acceptance is that ability to take a step back and say, oh, wait a second. I am feeling all of these things. This is very stressful, but I know what I can and cannot control. And I'm going to accept that in this space right now. And that can help alleviate a bit of that distress in the process. Another cool method, maybe a little more tangible that you can take on the go with you is the 5-4-3-2-1 method. I really like this method because it's, like I said, easy for you to kind of go around and do that on your own time. But essentially what it is, it's a grounding technique, which allows you to leave the distress in your mind and bring yourself back into reality, into that present moment, into the situation where you are able to control whatever it is you need to control in that moment. So this is about the 5 senses, right? And you can organize it however you would like. But, 5 things I can see, 4 things I can hear, 3 things I can touch, two things I can taste, 1 thing I can smell, for example, right? So you can organize that with whatever senses that you want to. And the goal here is to be able to experience and explain what those sensations feel like, look like, smell like, taste like, etc., in excruciating detail, right? So for example, if I want to say 5 things that I see, right? I'm going to look at the painting that's on the wall behind my computer, and I'm going to look at it intently and describe things that maybe would not be something I'd first glance at. It purposefully puts you in that moment to kind of regain control of that moment and regain a present experience. So just a few things to kind of think about the radical acceptance and the 5-4-3-2-1 method. These are things that can be used actively throughout any kind of space that you're in. So just a couple of things to kind of consider when we think about trying to build the balance. A couple other maybe organizational or time management type skills that can be helpful for creating balance. And these are especially helpful when we're thinking about what grad school can be like or school in general. We want to think about how we're creating our schedules, making sure that we're creating spaces for self-care, breaks, or other relaxation techniques, right? That just as easily as we could schedule a class time, we can schedule time for, I just need to sit down for 10 minutes. Or I'm going to do a meditation here if that's what I want to do. Similarly, we can block out time for vacations, families, friends, hobbies, things that we value. That's going to remind us of, oh, right, I am a sum of all of these parts within my wellness wheel. And I do want to make sure I'm connected to my values to build that balance. You might also want to look at your transitions between classes or activities to kind of create an emotional or mental reset. Like, it's really hard sometimes to go from a class straight into work or vice versa, right? And we need a little bit of a moment to decompress and reset to the best of our ability. So see if there are any instances where you can kind of use that transition time to do a deep breathing exercise or take a second and reflect or sit in silence. and sit comfortably for a moment. Those things can kind of help give you a clear mind to reset into that new role you're going into. Make sure you're shifting and shuffling priorities when needed, right? That perhaps work-related things aren't going to be as much of a priority when it's 3 a.m., right? Or school-related priorities are going to be really important, especially when you have a test up and coming. So being able to shift and shuffle your energies toward those things can be helpful. Make sure you're utilizing your support, right? And we're going to talk about finding support in a little bit, but working together with your loved ones, peers, colleagues, building that support system. You have a lot of people within your program, your department, your connection to UM-Flint that are here to support your finding of balance. So make sure you're utilizing those to the best of your ability when you need them. And then, of course, time management skills, right? Whatever works for you. Planners, calendars, task lists, using electronics as opposed to maybe paper and pen. All of those things are valid here, but once again, it's about tailoring it to your level of balance and where it works best for you and your organization. So we kind of talked a little bit about both of the mental, emotional kind of processing of our balance, as well as tips for that time management and organizational, because both of those things apply when we're thinking about our dimensions of wellness here. Okay, so we've talked a lot about that ability to balance life and balance the roles and the things that are kind of going on in our life. We even talked a little bit about how we identify when there's an issue within our dimensions of wellness so that we can start moving towards building better balance. And one of the ways that we can do that is by setting boundaries, right? So the only way we're going to be able to set boundaries is once we've identified the areas where boundaries need to be placed. And boundaries are kind of interesting. There's something that pops up a lot in conversations nowadays. And I think a good way to think about them is boundaries are something that help us build confidence in our own identity and our own experience, while also maintaining a level of connection and positive relationships with others. So there's a good graphic here from positive psychology for the 7 types of boundaries. So just in case you can't see it fully on your screen, there are mental, emotional, material, internal, conversational, physical, and time-based boundaries. Some of these you're going to use way more frequently than others. For example, I know a very common one that I see a lot of people using are emotional boundaries. So I'll read the little description there. It says, emotional boundaries are about how emotionally available you are to others. So something you might say to somebody is, as much as I want to support you right now, I don't have the emotional capacity to do so. That's a good thing for both you and the person you're connecting with. Because if you don't have that emotional capacity and you do start to try and emotionally support them, you're hurting yourself and perhaps you're not providing that best social connection that you'd like to see between the two of you. So just kind of keeping in mind that all of these different boundaries are meant to create a sense of your identity, where your limits are at, right? Knowing that, oh, I realize that, I spend way too much time doing this thing, right? And I need to shift my time internally to be able to spend more than 30 minutes on my homework at night, those types of things. I did see a question pop up. It says, where can we get these from? So something I can do at the end is I can post a link in the chat of this particular positive psychology page so that you can look at this. And then I think I can find, I got to double check if I have the resource with me on hand. I also have the dimensions of wellness explanation. So both of those can be available soon. So I appreciate the question. So thinking of these boundaries, let's talk about how we set them, which sometimes can be a little bit complicated. So when setting your boundaries, there's a few things that we kind of want to consider in determining whether or not boundaries need to be set. And then there's kind of a loose step-by-step process we can engage in. So first and foremost, we need to know where our limits are at. Boundaries, if you think about it, is another term for kind of barrier, right? Or you don't want to go outside the boundary, right? So we do eventually learn when something is outside of our boundaries or we've reached that limit. So some ways that we can kind of develop an understanding of our limits is by doing quick check-ins with ourselves. For example, we might ask ourselves, am I getting enough rest? Right? Or am I doing too in this situation right now? Or is this situation, this thing, this experience actually? Some of those quick check-ins can kind of keep us on track with knowing, oh, right, I got to deal with this. So keeping that in mind, identifying those limits helps us realize when we need to set a boundary. Part of setting boundaries is also recognizing when we need to learn to say no, or sometimes even yes, right? That yes, boundaries often are about something that maybe we don't want to happen or asking for something to change. But boundaries can also be about identifying things that we say yes to in order to increase our identity or our connection to our identity or better understand where our limits are at. And a lot of this ability to understand our boundaries, our limits, what we say yes or no to, comes from our priorities, which ties back into our dimensions of wellness, being able to identify where are those gaps? Where am I noticing I'm struggling in this area of wellness? And is it because I'm devoting too much time to something that's not helpful? Or am I missing out on something that I should say yes to, right? So where are my priorities at within that area? So once we've determined maybe some of those things related to, is this an area where I want to set boundaries? You know, is this a place that I'm ready to do so? We kind of shift into the step-by-step process, right? So first and foremost, we're going to define what that boundary is, right? Whatever that situation is, are we, and I'll go back in my slide here for a second. Are we looking at a boundary that is a physical boundary? Are we looking at an internal boundary that we want to set? Is it more mental? Those types of things. And we're also going to define what exactly is that boundary we're trying to set. And I'll give some examples here in the next slide, but we're defining what that boundary is. Once we've defined that internally, we can then move into the communicating of it, right? So maybe we're telling this to ourselves internally, saying, ooh, you know, I got to do better with this. I want to try like setting my limit here. Or maybe we're expressing it to a friend, a coworker, up here, whatever it might be. And then the last step is setting consequences. And this doesn't necessarily mean creating an ultimatum, as in, I gave you this boundary, if you don't respect it, then this thing happens. Right? Or it's either this or that. It's more so about what's going to happen if you don't feel respected. And a lot of the time that consequence is something you do internally rather than externally saying, this, you know, this thing is going to happen. I need you to respect this or bad things happen, right? Because this is your boundary. This boundary helps you determine, once again, what you're valuing in that situation and how you're going to get closer to that. You know, if you don't value spending a lot of time doing something in particular, then your boundary is going to be, I'm only going to do this for 30 minutes and then I need to move on to something else. And the consequence of not doing that is perhaps, oh, I didn't end up having time to do my homework, which means I'm turning in a late assignment or something along those lines. So once again, we're defining that boundary. What type is it? You know, where is it located? Communicating it with yourself internally or externally to another person, and then setting those consequences. Not an ultimatum, but what's going to happen if we notice there isn't respect toward that boundary. So here's a couple of examples. And these are not perfect by any means. And I'm sure that you all know how to communicate your concerns to the people around you and the situations that you're in. But the wording of these don't have to reflect how you're going to say it if you choose to set these types of boundaries. So a couple of examples that can kind of help put this into perspective. For example, an internal boundary might be, I'm going to keep a gratitude journal, right? So I'm defining this boundary of, man, I am spending so much time thinking negatively about all of the aspects of my life. This is really, bringing down my mood. I'm really struggling this. What do I do with that? Oh, right. I'm going to maintain, and my boundary is I'm going to keep a gratitude journal internally for myself. And if I don't do that, then I'm going to stay stuck in this negative mindset, right? That's the consequence. You could also say something of, I'm uncomfortable in this situation, so I'm going to leave. Or I will not offer more help than I can give. Whatever those boundaries are, whatever those like units of measure are, you can insert that information. But these are a couple of great examples of how to quickly and kind of efficiently express your boundaries in a clear way so that you yourself know why you're setting that boundary and the people around you do as well. Once again, the whole point is to be able to create that balance, create an understanding of how you've met those limits and how you want to kind of bring yourself back down to that peaceful space. And these are some of the ways you can communicate that. All right, so I know that was a lot of information, and I appreciate you bearing with me, but because that's so much information and a lot of this is happening internally, I always like to remind people that this is not going to change overnight. This takes practice, and this takes literally one moment, one situation at a time to accomplish. The point here is to be able to learn how to identify these areas that need help with balance, be able to prioritize those things, utilize some of those skills to kind of get you better acclimated to coping with that kind of distress that comes from imbalance. And then being able to implement setting boundaries or utilizing support systems in order to kind of navigate the challenges that you're facing. So utilize that concept of self-compassion we talked about earlier and remind yourself that nobody's expecting any great strides by tomorrow morning, and there is no timeline to this. You move at the pace that makes the most sense for you, and the more you practice, the more likely these processes are going to be second nature to you. They're going to be your habit, as opposed to this newness that we're trying to figure out. And I kind of want to end today's conversation to be able to leave, about 10 or 15 minutes or so for questions, is with all of that knowledge in the back of your head. I want you to kind of think about, once again, the conversation we wanted to focus on was, yes, creating balance and understanding that, but even more detailed was being able to look at setting boundaries in order to maintain that balance, and also finding support to maintain and build that balance. And I want to draw your attention to a couple of other, we'll call them resources, but these are also really great ways to build support specifically that will be helpful for your process here at UM-Flint. I will say all of these are offered by CAPS, and one of the best ways to be able to gain support and kind of connect with people is by either using the happenings email, which most of you should be subscribed to once the semester starts, or any other kind of information that Dr. Lewis provides. There are lots of different activities and connections that can be built on or off campus if you're a remote student. But these things in particular, I think, can be really helpful in, I guess, specializing the support that you're looking for. So first and foremost, we're going to be offering in September, we're not sure on the start date yet, but our weekly relax and release, which is the anxiety relief skills support group. So if you're experiencing some anxiety and the kind of way you're approaching it, this will be a great support group for you. That's offered here on campus. But I'll also gear you towards our virtual group, the Doc Den. Now, it is currently labeled as a doctoral support group, But Dr. Juanita, who is the director of CAPS, specifically our team, she's gonna hopefully be broadening that a little bit to include graduate, right? Because a lot of doctoral students are going through similar things as master's level students and other graduate programs. So the hope here is to be able to find support in all of these different areas as a graduate student. And this is continuous. We started this in winter, this past winter semester, and it's still going on. It will continue into the fall semester here, and it meets the second Monday of every month. You will definitely receive email communication from Dr. Juanita when we are rolling that out each time. And then lastly, we have our Instagram, which we provide a lot of great content on mental health support and just a variety of other topics. So if you're not particularly interested in, that one-on-one individual therapy, coming to CAPS or going to the specific departments to kind of ask for help, we do provide these kind of more on your own time supports. So feel free to check those out. The QR code for our Instagram is there if you'd like to look at it. But I definitely want to gear your eyes toward these groups because they'll be beneficial and they're drop-in, right? So you don't have to consistently be at every single one of them. There might be a topic or a specific thing that you want to focus on, and that's for one time and one time only. That's great. That's what they're there for whatever you need in creating that balance. And then just as we wrap up today, a few more resources. Oh, yep, I'm seeing some people talking about the doc den. Yeah, Dr. Juanita is great. She knows her stuff, so I really highly recommend it. But once again, I'm coming from CAPS, Counseling and Psychological Services. This is our mission statement. We offer individual therapy for students as a graduate student. That includes you, so feel free to stop by. But just some wellness activities that we utilize. If you want to use our massage chair or our biofeedback software, please do. We'll have that provided for you in our office. Just give us a call if you want to come and use it. And then this is our contact information if you want to set up counseling. Here's our phone number. It's really easy to remember, 762-3456. Apparently we worked really hard on that number, so it's easy to remember. You can also stop by or request a consultation online to come and see us. And I want to point you out to some other health and wellness resources. We obviously have rec services, which is directly next to the university center. We have our student success center. Students can come in and kind of work on just building a better sense of success through projects, etc. Tutoring is offered through the student success center. As well as our academic support specialists, and then the library. Thompson Library is great. They have a lot of great resources there as well, online and in person. And with that, I will wrap up. I really appreciate your time and energy being here today. And please let me know how we did. And by we, I mean myself. And you can feel free to give us some feedback. It really helps to kind of tailor these webinars. And then I'll be here with the next 10 or so minutes to answer any questions anybody has. Thank you again.
Well, let's open it up for questions. I know that Grace, I see your hand is still up, so I don't know if you have questions or not. I will allow you to, oh, she put it down. Never mind. So I didn't know if anyone else has questions for Reilly that she can answer for you. We can open it up. Not a problem, Grace. But any questions are good questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or you can type something in the chat and we'll get those questions answered. Not seeing any specific questions right now, Reilly, but I guess just as Reilly said, feel free to stay in touch with her. You can always reach out through CAPS and you can ask any questions along the way. Another great resource, as we've been talking about, making sure to take advantage of all of the resources that are available to you within your program, at the university and beyond to help you in this transition that you're going to be going through in starting a new graduate program, but also in the transition that you're going to be going from being either an undergraduate student to a graduate student, being someone that maybe has been out of school for a while, coming back to school. There's lots of transitions that you're going to be going through. And it is that process of practicing that Reilly was talking about. There's going to be mistakes made along the way. That's okay. Nothing wrong with that. You learn from those, you keep going, you pick yourself up and you learn some more. And there's going to be times where, it may be tough. There's going to be times where it's going to be smooth sailing. And it's good to know where those resources are when you need them to tap into whenever you need them. So that being said, are the groups virtual?
Good question. I was just looking at that. So the doc den is virtual. There will be a Zoom link that's provided in the email outreach that Dr. Juanita sends out. And then the relax and release anxiety skills release. We found that that's better in person. So that one is in person in the CAPS office, which is located in room 264 in the University Center. So we're on the second floor. And then keep an eye out. I think we will be offering other groups as well. I know last semester I provided what we call the Healing Hearts Circle, which was a relationship support group. And I think we're rolling out a couple new ones. So definitely keep an eye out on our Instagram and just other communications to see if there's a group that fits your needs. Great question. Thank you.
And I'm sure, Reilly, that CAPS would be more than willing to listen if there are groups of students that come and say, we'd really like a support group in this area.
Absolutely, 100%. We're always taking those ideas in mind, and the whole point of CAPS is to be able to curate that support mentally, emotionally for the students and what their needs are.
Okay. Well, Reilly, I just want to say thank you. Thank you as always for a great presentation, for sharing all of this amazing information. And we're going to be having another session starting up here in just a couple of minutes. So you have a couple minutes break before we start up, about 8 minutes until we start our next session. So please stick around. We're going to be having our next session is going to be having you start thinking about your career now, even before you start. What are things you can do to start thinking now about the end in mind? And we've got a great guest that's going to be joining us. Antonio Riggs is going to be joining us, and you're going to not want to miss that session as well. But Reilly, thank you so much for being here, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.